Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies, and I guess forget everything I said in yesterday's episode. Carlos Estevez signs with the Royals. Why did the Phillies choose not to bring him back? We'll discuss.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies, and I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philly for over 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure that you're rating and reviewing. If you're listening to this in podcast form, we're available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're checking us out on YouTube and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, go to the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. You'll get notifications when new episodes are posted. It also really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5. And if you win, you're going to score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Of course, the Eagles in the big game. Shout out to Locked On Eagles. Shout out Philly, city of nearly champions. Hopefully someone actually locks down the championship here. They're going to have great stuff all week. But we've got great stuff on the Phillies today, or at least great content. We're going to start off with Carlos Estevez signing with the Royals, where I'm going to basically have to say, forget everything that I mentioned in yesterday's episode. I wasn't wrong, I don't think. I'll explain kind of where things go from here. But also, why did the Phillies choose not to bring him back? Because it seemed like a smart thing to do. We're also going to talk about the Phillies farm system. There's an interesting article in The Athletic about the hierarchy of farm systems in Major League Baseball, and the Phillies are higher than you think. And we're going to do a bit of a vibe check from the fan base at the end of the episode as well. Just stuff that I'm gathering from having loose conversations about the team with people right now as the offseason progresses. But let's dive into this Estevez thing, because this is the biggest news of the day. So yesterday, I used the analogy of the Carlos Estevez situation to the analogy I used was like, imagine you're walking by a storefront and there's an item in there. I think I called it a jacket. And it's just like, if nobody's buying it, you keep walking by, you might see the price go down. So you might say, hey, I'll take another day to walk by it and see if the price continues to drop. And that may be what the Phillies are doing with the reliever market and with Carlos Estevez. Well, folks, somebody bought the jacket. Yesterday, he agrees to a deal with the Kansas City Royals. It is a 2-year deal worth $22 million. It includes a $13 million option for a 3rd year, or the Royals could have a $2 million buyout. So Estevez off the market. Both Hoffman and Estevez are gone. Both go to Blue American League teams. Toronto Blue Jays get Hoffman. Kansas City Royals get Estevez. And the Phillies do not bring back either of their top 2 righty relievers from last season. So that's a little bit troubling. Now we're in the situation where, because like I look at the bullpen and I'd say, I still think the Phillies have a talented bullpen with the names that are out there. Like Matt Strahm is very, very good. I think Jordan Romano can be very, very good if he's healthy. Ryan Kerkering, great. Jose Alvarado, high upside. Jose Ruiz, that's a guy that was on the team for a reason last year and actually had a sneaky, really good season. Joe Ross, he's been solid as a major league reliever. Like, there are some good names in the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen, but it still feels like there's a spot open. Unless they're keeping that spot open for guys on minor league deals in camp, or maybe they're thinking about keeping that spot open for, I don't know, a 6-man rotation, which I swear, on everything, I'll just tell you this right now. I'm very rarely livid with the Philadelphia Phillies organization, but if this plays out, that they break camp with 7 men in the bullpen, a 6-man rotation, and that 6th spot is a way to justify giving Taijuan Walker a chance to maybe earn some type of respect back in Philadelphia, I will lose all faith in this organization. I don't think they're going to do that because Dave Dombrowski does not run that type of organization. John Middleton would not allow that to happen, even though he's paying a lot of money for Taijuan Walker. But If they do a 6-man rotation, it better not be Taijuan Walker in that 6th spot. But anyway, I still think that they're going to have 8 guys in the bullpen, 5-man rotation, just like normal, and that's how they're going to start the season. But now that 8th spot is kind of up in the air. It could be one of the minor league arms of guys that could be a starter one day, but kind of want to break into the major leagues as a reliever. It could be guys that they signed to minor league contracts. It could be a guy still in free agency out there. But the reliever market, really from the second that I posted that episode yesterday, it picked up. We had one of the Rogers twins getting traded out of San Fran, going to Cincinnati, I believe he ended up. We got the Estevez signing. Like, guys are starting to move around a little bit. Maybe this is a run on relievers that the Philadelphia Phillies will get in on and make some type of deal. But they've been really, really quiet lately when it comes to offseason rumors. The Alec Bohm potential trade thing has really, really died down. He seems more and more likely by the day to be locked into that third baseman spot for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025, which is going to be an incredibly interesting conversation. But to get it back to Carlos Estevez, why in the world did the Phillies not want to re-sign him? Well, the numbers with Philadelphia might have trended in the wrong direction at the wrong time, right? I think he was good here. I do. I think he's a talented relief pitcher who could absolutely help this bullpen. But he was very good off the rip after being traded to Philadelphia. His last couple appearances of the regular season were not great. He had like a 1.7 something ERA in his first, I think it was 14 appearances for the Phillies. And then in his last couple, it was like a 6. And then he gives up the grand slam to Francisco Lindor in the postseason. I don't think the Philadelphia Phillies would be influenced more by that than what he did over the large majority of the regular season. But I don't know. Like, I'm not in the locker room every day. I don't see the interactions between the players and the way that, like, Dave Dombrowski does, Rob Thompson does. Every once in a while, I'll pop down there during media availability, or I'll be on the field during batting practice. But listen, like, these guys know behind the scenes stuff about player interaction that we don't know, mentality that we don't know. Like, this Alec Bohm thing is a perfect example. Came out of nowhere that he was going to get sat in a postseason series, and then came out of nowhere again that he was looking to get traded, or not that he was looking to get traded, but the organization was looking to trade him. So there are things we don't see all the time. Maybe there's a deeper reason where the Phillies were like, well, Estevez, I don't know. He's a good leader, but does he have the postseason focus to get the job done in October? Again, all speculative. I'm not saying any of that is the reason definitively. I'm just saying sometimes teams have more information. Remember our reaction to the Jeff Hoffman deal. Why wouldn't the Phillies bring him back? This issue, that issue. He could have been here. He could have been a great member of this bullpen. He ends up as a reliever. And then the next thing you know, multiple teams come out and say, hey, we denied a physical on this guy. And that's probably why the Philadelphia Phillies chose not to bring him back. We'll see if anything comes out about Estevez in the coming days and the Phillies actually get a chance to explain without explaining, explain through insiders why they chose not to bring him back. It could have just been what we talked about with the Austin Hayes signing in Cincinnati yesterday, where every contract for the Philadelphia Phillies is like extra money compared to teams not in the luxury tax. Kansas City, I don't believe, is anywhere close to the luxury tax. The Phillies, that $22 million deal over 2 years would have been more expensive here in Philadelphia than it was in Kansas City. So that's why you really have to respect what John Middleton, Dave Dombrowski, Sam Fold, guys like that, Preston Mattingly, what they do to put this team in the best possible spot, because they're operating up against the luxury tax. John Middleton is spending that extra money to make his team work, but they didn't do it in the case of Carlos Estevez. So as far as other options out there, I mean, it's minimal. Tanner Scott's off the board. Jeff Hoffman's off the board. Like, all the high-level relievers that you were looking at to start the offseason, like the cream of the crop, are gone by this point. But when we ran through the relief pitcher market, there were a good amount of guys that were kind of in this zone with Estevez, like maybe like a tier down. So there was like the A-plus tier guys that were out there, and then which was Hoffman, it was Tanner Scott. Then you had like the A-tier guys who I guess you'd look at it and you'd put Carlos Estevez in there, but there's still a lot of like those B-plus caliber guys. The weird thing now is the Phillies are going to have to figure out who's going to be their closer, that's a deeper conversation for another day because I could do a wildly long episode on who could be the closer of the Philadelphia Phillies. But Hoffman was a potential option. Estevez was a potential option. They kind of split the requirements last year, or at least like they shared some of that responsibility with some other guys because the Phillies didn't really have a set closer until Estevez was acquired after the deadline. So now we got to look at who's in-house and say, well, who's going to be the closer? Will it be Jordan Romano? Will it be maybe Matt Strom? Will it be a guy like a Ryan Kerkering getting thrust into that role? Who knows what the Philadelphia Phillies have in store for the bullpen roles in 2025. But what I do know is it will not include Carlos Estevez, who signed with the Kansas City Royals. This is going to be one that Phillies fans, I think, are a little bit annoyed with, and that's okay. I am too. I didn't see a huge reason why they should not bring him back. It kind of felt like they needed to after what the Dodgers did acquiring Tanner Scott. You kind of have to hold serve with that team, and you had an open spot in the bullpen to do it. But again, like I said on yesterday's episode, there are more available relievers than any other position in baseball. So just because you don't get this guy doesn't mean you don't get another guy that can fill a role similar to that. Doesn't mean that they can't make something work with time before spring training begins and pitchers and catchers report. So it's not the end of the world, but it sucks because I did have Carlos Estevez. Like that was my number one priority for the Philadelphia Phillies at the given time. And now that is off the board unaccomplished. And that's just my personal preference. Again, I've been wrong before. I will be wrong again. But I would have liked to see him back here. A little disappointed he's not. Another guy that, even though he was only here for like a couple months, it seemed like a great teammate. You wish him all the best in Kansas City, especially because he's going to the American League and you don't have to worry about facing him. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at the farm system. We did a look into prospects recently, but I was reading some articles on The Athletic today, and we got a farm system ranking. And the Phillies are interestingly high. So we're going to take a look at why they're ranked that high, according to the article. And we're also going to take a peek at the players that made them rank this high, according to Keith Law of The Athletic. So we'll talk about that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though. FanDuel is absolutely awesome. And you know what else is awesome? The Super Bowl. The big game, Super Bowl 59, and FanDuel, they're going to give you everything you need to get ready for it. Super Bowl 59 is here, one game, two teams, the Philadelphia Eagles being one of them, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss. I've hit the coin toss 9 of the last 10 years. I will give you my pick on this podcast. Stay tuned. But anyway, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, so let's look at this from Keith Law. Keith Law does a great job of taking a look at the top 100 prospects rankings. He does a great job of breaking down farm systems and everything like that. And he posted an article in The Athletic titled MLB 2025 Farm System Rankings. Keith Law ranks all 30 teams. The Mariners are the new number one. That's part of the title. So we'll run through some of the teams. Philly's in a very interesting spot. He breaks this down into tiers. So tier 1 is the Mariners at 1, the Red Sox at 2, the Dodgers at 3. Just so annoyed. Tier 2, Diamondbacks at 4, the Cleveland Guardians at 5, Chicago Cubs at 6, Detroit Tigers at 7, Cincinnati Reds at 8. If you've noticed, we have not seen a NL East team yet. Then there's Tier 3. Tier 3 leads off with the number 9 ranked farm system, according to Keith Law, and that is the Tampa Bay Rays. Number 10, the Milwaukee Brewers. And at number 11, it is your Philadelphia Phillies. Yes, a nearly top 10 farm system, according to Keith Law, which you might say, We're not used to that happening. And especially with a guy like Dave Dombrowski, I was told he was going to come in here and trade all my prospects away. And we're never going to have anybody to replenish after you get outside your championship contention window. Well, clearly, that doesn't seem to be the case according to these rankings. Just for future reference, the Mets are at 15. They're also in the Tier 3, rounding it out. The Nationals are in Tier 4 at 17 overall. The Marlins in Tier 5 at 18. And the Atlanta Braves are at 28th in Tier 7. Nice to see Atlanta all the way down there. But they have a lot of young players locked up at the major league level, so they don't really need it. But here's the idea of the 11th ranking from Keith Law, and I'll give you my thoughts on this in a second. But he says how it's top heavy, 3 guys in the top 50. Those 3 guys are obviously Andrew Painter, J.P. Crawford, and Aiden Miller. Well, there will be a day as a Philadelphia Phillies fan where I will never, ever, ever forget Aiden Miller's name. But they also have depth potential from the lowest levels, guys down in low A ball, rookie ball, and stuff like that. A lot of high risk, high reward guys in the top 20 for the Philadelphia Phillies. They might have 5 or 6 stars, real impact players on either side of the ball in the system right now. And if that's all they get, that's still going to be a ton of major league value, writes Keith Law. So thank you to Keith Law for breaking that down and providing some of the content for today's episode. Go read his stuff on The Athletic. He always does an exceptional job. But it's interesting because I don't really like top-heavy prospect groupings, right? Like, I don't like the organizations that are ranked high, inside the top 10, inside the top 5, based on the merit of like 2 or 3 guys. Because one, sure things are never sure things in baseball. We've seen too many times in Philadelphia. We've seen too many times in other organizations. Hey, this is a can't-miss prospect. Guy ends up never panning out. Guys like Sixto Sanchez. Guys like Spencer Howard. Now, luckily, the Phillies were able to move off those guys quickly enough that they didn't really kill you. Guys like Scott Kingery, who you gave this insane deal before he ever played at the major league level. He never really quite cut it out. I think he's going to the Angels now. He's a member of, I believe. So he's one of those guys, I mean, I guess you kind of always do root for because he got put in a tough situation from getting that early contract. If you don't pan out, the city will be against you. But bottom line is, when you have top heavy and a group of Painter, Miller, Crawford, and those are your guys, like, that will bump up the prospect list. But that also means that if one of those guys don't pan out, it is exponentially worse than like a system with just a bunch of like, okay, these are solid level guys. Maybe one of them could be a star. I would rather have a farm system with upside than a farm system that's top heavy. But the younger players in the Philadelphia Phillies farm system, guys like Tate, Eduardo Tate is going to be a guy to keep an eye on. Moises Chase, who we talked about, guys that are going to be in a situation where, hey, they could pop up. Chase is a little bit older, actually, but Tate is kind of like the focus of the young guys. He's still way down in the system, but he is a future big-time catching prospect. And they have a couple of these guys like kind of waiting in the wings down there in A ball, double A ball. They're just getting started their minor league journey that could have upside. But again, that's very far out and projectable. I probably would not have the Phillies as high as Keith Law has them. But I'm also, I'll tell you, I'm cynical when it comes to Philadelphia Phillies prospects because this is not a team that has been all that great at developing prospects in my lifetime as compared to some of their peers. I'd say that the Philadelphia Phillies, since I really started being old enough to be aware of baseball, so we'll just go back to like, I don't know, the early 2000s. Yeah, they've been middle of the pack when it comes to developing guys interiorly in their own farm system, right? They're not terrible. They're not great. But we all have these biases against our teams. Think about the Eagles, like outside of Zach Bowen this year, linebackers have been weak for the Eagles forever. So when they sign a linebacker, you're like, oh, this guy is probably just okay. For the Sixers, if you sign an injury-prone player, that has definitely become a narrative for that team. Like for the Flyers, goaltenders have always been a problem for this organization as long as I've been alive, just to give you like kind of the idea. It's not just the Phillies, but for the Phillies, like farm systems, specifically outfielders, which is what Justin Crawford, did I call him J.P. Crawford earlier in the episode? Justin Crawford you hope to see he gets into a place where he can really contribute to this team and knock off that stigma that the Phillies can't develop outfielders. But it should make you feel good, right? Like, as cynical as I am about prospects with the Philadelphia Phillies, just because I think they should have done more with what they've had in previous years. And I'm talking even back to like Ruben Amaro and before Pat Gillick. Like, I still think there's meat on the bone compared to what the Phillies could have had. Keith Law does this a lot more often than me. He goes a lot more in depth than me, and he's got him at 11. So he likes the upside of guys way down. He likes the upside of 3 big-time top 50 prospects in baseball right now. It's great to have 3 guys in the top 50. Like, that is absolutely awesome to see for the Philadelphia Phillies. So we'll see how that plays out, but we're starting to get to a point. Like, this is the last year where it's not high-level DEFCON, or I guess low-level DEFCON, for the Phillies having to replace some of these guys like JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, all of these dudes who are starting to be the old guard of the team that are going to have to age out or have contracts come up and have situations like that. The Phillies will have to start ushering in the next generation in the next year or two here. And that's going to be something that, if you can do it from the farm system, especially considering how much money you've paid some guys already on the roster, it'll make it much, much easier. So good news there as far as the prospect situation is concerned. It's never bad to be highly ranked there, and it's never bad to be highly ranked while also being a highly competitive team at the major league level. It's a really good balance that Dave Dombrowski has struck. He deserves a lot of credit for that. That's why I think he's one of the greatest front office executives in the sport right now, and will go down as one of the greats of all time and be a baseball Hall of Famer one day as a front office member. But I'm very interested for this final segment, right? I'm interested in a lot of stuff. I feel like that's my tease to a lot of things. But I want to know the vibe, or rather I want to talk about the vibe of the fan base. And this is going to be something that we do in Off the Poll for Wednesday. I'll ask you that question in a segment coming up. But kind of, where is everybody right now with this team? And I'm not talking about just Dombrowski. I'm not talking about just Rob Thompson, just the players. I'm just talking about more when you think about the Philadelphia Phillies right now. If I just walked up to you on the street and asked you, what do you think about the Phillies? What would be the responses that I get from fans of this team? We're going to talk about that coming up as we continue, or rather wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, y'all, vibe check time. And this is something that I'd love to hear from you in the comments. We're going to make it our off the poll question for tomorrow's episode. So off the poll, if you're not familiar, you can go to our Twitter account at @LO_Phillies, or my personal Twitter account, because I retweet everything from @ConnorThomas975. And I'll put out a poll. And the poll is basically just going to be, I'll have to come up with 4 options for it. But what is your vibe when you think about the Philadelphia Phillies right now? That's going to be the main thought behind it. Now, I'm going to talk through this just with myself here into my computer, but let me know in the comments of this episode what your thoughts are on the Philadelphia Phillies right now, just your general feeling about the team, what they've done this offseason, where exactly they're at as far as contender status, what the Dodgers situation, the Mets signing Soto, what all of that does. I just want to get the pulse of the fan base as we prepare to exit the month of January and enter the month where we'll see the Philadelphia Phillies take the field down in Clearwater. Yes, this is the last month without the Phillies on the field. We've made it, folks, just about. I mean, it's not till February 12th, I believe, they go down there. But still, we're there. We've made it through the long off season. Spring training is going to get going, and that'll be a beautiful, beautiful thing to see the boys back on green grass. Long way to go. Long season, man. February to almost November. Love you guys hanging around as much as you do. But vibe check, back to it, right? When I ask people about the Philadelphia Phillies right now, it almost feels like annoyance. At least that's what it seems that I get when I bring up the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, part of it could be comparison. Comparison is the thief of joy, is how the old saying goes. And the Philadelphia Phillies have one tough sibling to compare themselves to right now in the Philadelphia Eagles, who are going to be playing for Super Bowl 59 on February 9th. And this town is always going to be a football town. So when people see the success the Eagles have, they get focus on that. Then you bring up a team that collapsed to a division rival in the postseason last year and hasn't won a World Series in this iteration of the team, even though they've had opportunities. You start to say, okay, well, if the Eagles cash in, the Phillies are little brother once again. There was a second there where the Philadelphia Phillies was like, oh, wow, this team is one that could bring baseball to the top in the city. Football will always be number one. But I think what it feels like, the people's gut reaction is the Phillies are a team that wastes opportunities. The Phillies are a team that doesn't cash in. The Phillies are a team that don't feel like they make the most out of the chances that they get. And I can't really argue with that sentiment right now from the fan base. I do also keep having this conversation with people about running it back. I think people are tired of this Philadelphia Phillies team. And that sucks, right? And naturally, you're going to have that happen, right? To use another example, and we've been doing a lot of cross-sports pollination on the show today, but like think about where the Buffalo Bills must be at, losing to Kansas City all the time in the postseason, always having a good team, but not making it to over the hump because they've got to play Patrick Mahomes. Like, it's not exactly the Phillies situation, but I do think that there are probably some people in Buffalo who should be like, Josh Allen is an insanely good quarterback. But we're going to, like, I'm kind of tired of it because he can't win the last one. He can't bring us to the Super Bowl, or at least he hasn't. And that's not fair because it doesn't show the talent level of the player. I think the Phillies are in the Josh Allen zone. And that's not a bad place to be. The thing you have to think about is the alternative, right? Like where you could be. Would you rather be a fan? And this, people are going to say, screw this. And I get it. But sometimes you need to have a little bit of reality dropped on you, and that's part of my job with what I do here. Would you rather be Washington? Would you rather be Miami? Would you rather be those teams in the division that are bottom dwellers, that are trading all the time, selling all the time, not signing players, not winning games, not making the playoffs, and when they do on the off chance, like the Marlins did 2 years ago, getting absolutely smoked by the Phillies right off the rip, and your season is done? Like, there are so many organizations in worse spots than the Philadelphia Phillies. And the goal is not to be good. The goal is to be number one, right? The goal is to win it all. I understand that. This is not a consolation prize. Be happy with what the Philadelphia Phillies have done. I'm not saying that. Excuse me. But what I am saying is you have to have perspective. The situation you're tired of is just like, it's so much better than what other teams have. We kind of almost need a Prince and the Pauper situation with the fan base and see how some of these other teams live day to day. And if you're upset with your life of luxury, switch places with me for a day. See what it's like to be a fan of the, Minnesota Twins, the Oakland Athletics, who aren't even in Oakland anymore. Like, there are so many teams that you look at around baseball that are in a worse spot than the Philadelphia Phillies. And that's why it's so funny to me when I hear people talk about this team so annoyed. Like, they won 95 games last year. They won the NL East for the first time in 13 years. They had the second best regular season record in all of baseball. They went out in the first round of those playoffs. All of those things are true. And while the playoff loss to the Mets kills that season, right? It invalidates anything for that season. What it doesn't do is it doesn't invalidate the accomplishments for future seasons. It doesn't say, well, the Phillies are always chokers. No. It doesn't say the Phillies can't win it all. They can't get over the hump. No, it doesn't say that. It says in that season, they let a major opportunity go because they collapsed near the end of the season, couldn't figure it out, couldn't hit timely, and that's a trending theme. But it doesn't mean you don't have a good baseball team, right? You can't look at that and say, well, those 4 games make me think this team is not as good because the 95 wins they had over 162 is now invalidated. Like, I just can't mentally understand how people do that. So I would love to hear the vibe check is, hey, we've taken some time. Still annoyed about the loss to the Mets, but we've accepted this is still a good baseball team. We're going to go in with high hopes, as Harry Callis once sang, and we're going to believe in this team to maybe make something this year outside of the whole Dodgers quotient, which they just may be this unbeatable super team. But I would love for that to be a response. I don't think it's going to be. So I'm going to put out the poll about the vibe for the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm going to try and be succinct with a couple of answers that cover the buckets that I think people fit in. But it is a weird vibe. And this is a very big season for how this Philadelphia Phillies fan base views their team. We'll see how it all plays out. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Remember, that'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted, so you'll never miss any of our content. Plus, it's a great way to help us out. I'd say thank you to the folks here on Locked On Phillies. But the folks here on Locked On Phillies, I mainly mean just me. I'm editing all of this, doing all this myself. But appreciate that very much. And I will talk to you tomorrow for the results of the Off the Polls segment and plenty more Phillies talk. Last episode of January. And then since the month of spring training. So we'll talk about that on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.